Hi, my name's John Brown. I'm a librarian in the Research and Copyright team at Curtin University Library. Later on, I might be joined by some other people, but in this video, we'll be going through how to create a data management plan at Curtin. But before we start, let's cover what this video will go over. We'll introduce what a data management plan, or DMP, is for, why you'll need one at Curtin, what information you'll need to complete one. We'll go over step-by-step how to create a plan using the Curtin DMP tool, and then what you should do once you've completed your plan. We'll also let you know about the resources that can help you with this and who you can get in touch with if you need help. Okay, let's jump right in. So, what is a data management plan? A data management plan is a document that outlines what a researcher will do with their data over the course of their entire research project. They're used in research institutions and organizations around the world to help improve the effectiveness, quality, and value of research. Depending on the research context, they can be very descriptive, or they can be more general. Some DMPs will be very open-ended, but others will ask very specific and technical questions about plans around the data. And when we're talking about data here, it's a very broad term. If you've created something that validates or supports what your final work looks like or suggests, then it can be considered data. This means that sometimes people are already aware they have data. It's measurements from instrumentation, or it's observations from field work, or survey responses. But sometimes data can also be things like an early draft of a screenplay, an earlier version of an analysis algorithm, or a different edit of a film. All of these things document and support the outcome of the research, so all of them can be termed data, even if you usually wouldn't use that term. So, why do institutions want their researchers to do data management plans? For a variety of reasons. But the core benefit is that research is a long and costly process, and when you make a data management plan, you can have another more experienced person look over your future plan and give you feedback that can help you avoid problems later on. Problems around research data come in many forms. I didn't keep my early work and now it's lost forever. I didn't think to ask if I could use that data set. I stored my data in a poor place and now I've leaked sensitive details out into the world. I don't know which of these three files was created first. None of my collaborators can get to the files they need to. In all of these cases, having someone point out the issues in your plan can help you avoid these stumbling blocks before they derail your research. And lots of the feedback that you'll get is to help make our data more fair. This is an acronym that's becoming commonly used to refer to good qualities that we'd like our completed data to have. It's findable by others. People can see the work we did. It's accessible. They can get to it easily and use it if it's appropriate. It's interoperable. When they get to it, it's in a format that they can use it. And it's reusable. It's been given reuse or licensing permission that makes it clear what they can do with it. And these qualities will help all research reproducibility and documentation. Everyone can be more certain that what we discover is valid, and they can more deeply understand how we got to our endpoint. But what about DMPs at Curtin specifically? Well, at Curtin, DMPs are created in the DMP tool at dmp.curtin.edu.au. The plan is created through a series of questions to be answered around your plans for your research data. Students who are doing any research for HDR study will require a DMP for their candidacy application in Milestone 1. Staff doing research should make a DMP so there's a record of what your data is about, in case DTS or records and archives need to know and can't contact you for whatever reason. However, both staff and students will require a data management plan when applying for ethics approval, for either human or animal research ethics approval, or when looking to access the research drive, which is the network storage solution provided by DTS for all Curtin researchers. One question that we get asked frequently is, can I change my DMP answers? Yes, you can, and if your research plans change, you should change it. Research projects can change for many reasons. Maybe a new technique emerges in your field. Maybe new and better opportunities arise, or opportunities close. Maybe you have a change in staffing or in supervisors. If you need to change your plans around data, it's good to update your DMP to reflect your plans. It should be a living document, not something that you complete once and never look at again. The next thing is that your DMP is private. No one else can see it except for your supervisor or principal investigator, DTS, and whoever you send the exported DMP to. The final thing to note is that the DMP process shouldn't be scary. It's not here in place at Curtin to trick you or to trap you or to kick you out of the university. It's there so that someone with more experience or knowledge of specific systems and research processes can look over what your plans are and give you some advice or recommendations that will make your research journey better. So, what will you need in order to complete a DMP? Well, firstly, you'll need to be a current student or staff member at Curtin so you can log on and access the DMP tool. Secondly, your research project will need to be fairly defined. You should know what data you'll be creating, collecting or reusing, what format it'll be in, who will be accessing it, and where you'll be storing it while you're working on that project, and when you've completed it. If any of these details change, that's fine. You'll be able to update the plan when things change. But in order to finish the first version of your DMP, you'll definitely need that information. And finally, for students, you'll need the staff ID of your supervisor at Curtin. For staff, if you're working or collaborating under a principal investigator, you'll need your principal investigator staff ID. However, if you're a staff member completing a DMP for your own project, you'll just need your own staff ID. Let's move to the DMP tool. For this section of the video, I'll go through all of the questions in the plan one by one, give you an idea of the things that you should be discussing in each section and any specific things that you'll need to outline or mention if they're relevant to your research. The description below on YouTube should have time codes for the questions if you want to jump forward or ahead to a specific question or come back at a later point. So, once we're logged onto the Curtin DMP tool, we'll just need to go and create new plan. Page 1. The first question is, provide a title for the research project. This answer is generally something like your research proposal title, your thesis title, something like that. A sentence or two so that you and any other relevant people will know which project this plan is for. Next is the research project summary. This is a brief description of your research. It's like an abstract that gives some context on what your research problem is, your plan process, any info you might have about the intended outcomes, that sort of thing. You can use a summary of your project proposal if you have one. It's intended to give some context around what you're doing and what you hope to achieve with your research. Next up is the script project number. This is a number that will have been given to you by your school or the research office. It's used for tracking costs when you're working on a project with grant funding. If you haven't been given a script number, you won't need one, so you can leave this blank. If you have been given one, enter it here. Next, we have keywords. You can enter some keywords for your project if you like. These aren't publicly searchable, so it's more for your own benefit if you want to add them. 6 to 10 descriptive words is fine. Next up, we have the Supervisor or Principal Investigator section. Here's where you'll need to enter the staff ID of your Supervisor or Principal Investigator that I mentioned before. This would be 6 digits and 1 letter. It doesn't matter if you put the letter in uppercase or lowercase. If you have multiple supervisors or principal investigators, you'll only be able to enter one of their IDs here. So enter the ID of your main supervisor, or the supervisor who has the best understanding of your research project currently. Only one supervisor will see your plan appear in their version of the DMP tool, so you may need to send a PDF of your completed plan to both supervisors. I'll show you how to export a completed plan at the end of the video. And the last question on this page is faculty. Enter whichever faculty you belong to. If your research is across faculties, enter whichever faculty your supervisor or your main supervisor is in. Then we click Save and Next and move on to page 2. The first question on page 2 asks for a summary of your research project data. This is where you should outline things like, what are you collecting data on? How are you collecting it? How are you analyzing it? Are you using any special tools, techniques, or software for either the collection or the analysis of your data? You'll want to outline these sorts of things here. Some of the things, though, that you'll need to specifically mention if they're relevant here are, if you're reusing data from someone else, a collaborator, a purchased or licensed dataset, or a standard dataset in your field, you'll need to identify if there are restrictions on what you can do with that data once the research is finished. If you're using any special instrumentation provided by a research group or an external body, you should mention that here. And if you have collaborators or if you're reusing data, you need to outline what the data ownership rights are. Depending on contractual agreements and institutional policy, you may not end up as the owner of the intellectual property in your data. If you're unsure about this, you should read the information linked in the library guide and have a conversation with your collaborators or funding partners to make sure that everyone has the same understanding. By clicking here on the More Information on Defining Research Data will lead you through to the library guide. There's some useful information on ownership here that might help you out with this question. The second question wants to know how identifiable the data you're collecting is. This means, if I have your data, can I discover personal information about your research subjects? His question is here to help control the risk to participants of their private information being made public. Some research will need data that easily identifies individuals, and that's fine, but at every level you'll need to make sure that you're taking appropriate precautions with it when it comes to storage, access, and sharing. So, there's 4 levels to this. The most basic level is not applicable. No human data is being used. This is where you aren't studying people in any way. You're making geological samples, you're measuring fish, you're tracking solar flare patterns. Your research doesn't have any information about people, so no one can be identified. The next level is non-identifiable. This is when your data has never been labeled with individual identifiers. Maybe you've been doing multiple choice questionnaires in the street and you've never asked the names of the respondents, so their answers will never identify them. If you're doing online questionnaires and you don't collect any respondent information, this data is non-identifiable. The next level is where it starts to get a bit more tricky. This is when data is re-identifiable. This is when you have something that identifies an individual, but it's been removed and replaced by a code, but it's still possible to re-identify an individual. This might be because the population you're studying is small. If you're studying the opinions of Cuban migrants living in Joondalup, there might not be a large population of possible respondents, so private information about those respondents may be discovered by working back and determining who it could be answering. You've removed their name and their address, but they can still be identified. Or maybe that you have health data around a specific procedure. Not many people have had that procedure, and so it's possible to determine who this data relates to. In these cases, you may need to aggregate datasets when making them available later, or provide them only to approved users with strict conditions in order to protect the identity of the research subjects. The final level is individual identifiable. This is the one that requires the most care in data handling. This is when your data points specifically and directly to one person. If you have video footage, if you have genetic information, if you have specific name and information about addresses captured, all of these things point to one person who you have private information on. Now, if you have multiple pieces of data or data sets that have different levels of identifiability, you should check all the boxes that apply here. The library guide has some useful information and links on data identifiability. If this is an area of concern for you, it's good to check that information out. The next question is on human participant information, biospecimens, and overseas data transfer. In short, if you are sending any data about people overseas, you need to state that here and outline how you're being suitably careful with that data. There might be privacy issues or legislated data transfer requirements. This is especially the case for health data. So, if you're sending data overseas for analysis, or if you need to use a cloud storage option that has overseas data centers like OneDrive, you'll need to report yes here, and in this box outline what steps you're taking to make sure that data is protected and secure. If you have no human participant information, you can say no and move to the next question. Also, if you have human participant information but you're not sending it overseas, you can also say no. This might be the case if you're doing all of your data analysis within Australia and storing it on the research drive, where data is only held inside Australia. The next question is around goods on the Defense and Strategic Goods list. This question is about goods or information about goods that are related to conventional, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons and any delivery systems. If your research area is covered in the Defensive and Strategic Goods list, you'll need to report it here and, similar to the human participant information, outline how you're keeping it safe. Once again, if your research isn't related to anything on the list, you can say no and move to the next question. Also, if it is on the list, but once again, you're not sending it overseas, you can also say no. The final question on this page is around data organization and structure. This question wants you to outline what processes and methods you'll use to keep a track of the files and folders you create and what's inside them. How will you name your files within a folder? What folders will sit inside what other folders? There's some useful information on the library guide that gives some ideas, but this answer really depends on the details of your research. There aren't any standard systems of doing this. You'll need to think about the data you're creating and how you think it makes sense to group and store it. Sometimes a good cue to think about this is, does the file or folder name give me a clue about what's in this file or folder and how it's different to the others in the same directory? The other question you should ask yourself is, will all the computer systems I'm working with accept the types of names that I want to use? If you're working with collaborators, you should definitely document the system you come up with so that everyone is applying the same method consistently. Another option is, if you've already created your folder structure, you can take a screenshot of it and upload it here if you like. Once we've finished all the questions on this page, we click Save and Next and go to the final page, page 3. The first question on page 3 asks you to outline where you're storing your data. Depending on the nature of your research, you may need to follow legislation on where you're allowed to store. You may have requirements from your collaborating organizations or your collaborators as individuals. You might have funder requirements or specific performance requirements in order for you to follow your research plans. This is where you'll need to outline, I'm storing my electronic data here. There's some information on your options in the linked library guide page here, but in most cases you should be storing your data on either the research drive or on OneDrive. And when your research is complete, you should definitely be depositing it on the research drive for longer term storage. You should also consider what data or file formats you're storing your data in for that longer term period. It's not much good if you've stored your world-changing data in proprietary file type and you can't get into the file 10 years down the track. So consider migrating that data into an open format if possible. And if your research has materials or physical things that need to be stored, like rock samples, prototypes, or that sort of thing, you should outline how you're going to keep those, which may require a bit of planning. The next question on this page asks you to estimate your storage space requirements. This question is really here to prompt you to think about storage capacity and make sure you don't accidentally fill up your storage and have your research delayed while you acquire more research storage space. It's also there so that DTS have an idea of how much space you'll need on the research drive when your request gets sent through to them. Most requests are fine, but if you ask for more than 5 terabytes, they might have a chat with you to see if there's a better way to store your data. The next question on page 3 wants to know, how will your data be kept safe from human or technical failure? What it's really wanting to know is, how and where are you backing up your data? If your research requires physical notes or paper, how are you keeping those safe? Loss of data can severely hinder your research. Depending on what you lose, you could be set back weeks or years. If you've got time-sensitive observations, it may be literally impossible for you to get those back again. Doesn't matter if the data loss is due to a machine error, like all of a sudden your hard drive doesn't show up your computer, or if it's a human error, if you leave your laptop on the bus. You've lost your data. Your research may be in trouble. So, if you've got a good routine of backing up your data, you can minimize the trouble you face. There are 2 things that we generally suggest here. First, schedule the backup. Don't rely on your own memory. Your computer probably has software installed on it already where you can pick which folders to back up, where you want to put the backup file, and how often, and the software will do the rest. The next thing we suggest is to utilize the 3-2-1 backup method. This is where you have 3 copies of any important data you're working on. 2 of them are kept in different storage media to protect against format failure, so maybe you keep 1 copy on an external hard drive and 1 on the OneDrive in the cloud. That's the second element. And the one element is that 1 of the copies is kept in an entirely different location, which means that if your office gets flooded or your house tragically burns down, you haven't lost all of the copies of your backup. If you put your laptop backups into your laptop bag and your laptop bag gets stolen, the backups won't be much good. So for this section, you want to be outlining how you're backing up your research. The next question on this page is around the minimum retention period of the data you collect. The destruction of all data in Western Australian universities is guided by the Western Australian University Sector Disposal Authority, and this includes research data. The drop-down menu here gives some brief descriptions on which category you'll fit into and how long you'll need to store your data. Generally, most research not involving children or clinical trials will need to be stored for 7 years. Anything with clinical trials for 25 years, and if you're involving carcinogens or nuclear materials for 50 years. If any of this is unclear and you have questions on how long you'll need to store your data, you can follow the information links here and get in touch with Curtin Information Management and Archives, and they'll be able to help you determine the retention period. Relating to this, the good news I have for you is that your obligations to store your data can easily be met by making sure your data is on the research drive when you complete your research project. The next question on this page is around access. This wants you to outline, how will I give my collaborators access to my data in a way that suits them while still keeping it secure? These details might be covered in the storage section above, but you might need to give some more clear details if you have a particular plan or requirements on how you're going to work with your collaborators. Generally, the more sensitive your data is, though, the more important this question is. The next question on this page is around publication and sharing, making your data findable and accessible to other researchers. We're seeing that increasingly researchers are being asked to make their data underlying their research claims available. This is so that the research has greater reproducibility and reliability. If the data cannot be made available in a suitable manner, an article may be rejected. We're also seeing lots of requirements in Europe for researchers who have received publicly funded research grants to make their data publicly available. This is something we expect to see more and more of in Australia. As well as these requirements, which are coming increasingly common, there are benefits that you will gain yourself for publishing your data. You'll have better citation rates and better professional networks, as well as giving back to the body of knowledge in your field of research. If your discipline has a commonly used data portal or repository and you're planning on putting your data in there, you should mention it here. So in most situations, you'll put something like, I will make this version of my data available on this data portal as requested by my funding agreement. Or, I will make this version of my data available here as required by my publishers. Or, I will publish my data in the Curtin Research Data Collection, which, by the way, is free. You can get more information on that by clicking the link here. There are two things that you should specifically outline here if relevant to your research. The first is if you've reused data from other people. This could be purchased datasets, publicly available datasets, or datasets from your collaborators. If you're planning on including datasets that you yourself didn't create, you should outline how you've obtained permission to publish and share them. Publicly available data doesn't always allow republication, so you should check with the creators to see that you're permitted to do what you think you are. The second thing that you should cover is if you have sensitive data. You'll then need to outline how you've gained permission to publish the data about your respondents. You'll need to outline how you're planning on protecting the privacy of the participants. This could be something that I've mentioned before: data aggregation, de-identification, mediated access. Whatever method you use, you need to outline it here, such as, I'm making sensitive data available in this way and it's okay because I've done this with my data and I've asked these people if I can, and I've retained that permission. Obviously, there are severe ethical issues around releasing private data without permission, so you'll definitely need to avoid that, while balancing that with having reliable research claims. The final question on this page, and the final question in the data management plan, relates to your time frame around data publication. In some cases, you do want to make your data publicly available, but not immediately. Maybe you have plans to commercialize the research, or maybe your collaborators have given you data under the condition that it's not immediately released. Any of these reasons are fine. So in this area, you'd say, I will embargo the release of my data until this date, or until I've completed these activities. If you have no plans to delay the release of your data, you can leave this field blank. Then, once again, we click Save and Next. So, once you've finished the third page and you're happy with what you've planned, you're all done for now. If you have a supervisor who needs to approve your plan, you should let them know that you're finished and your plan should be viewable in their My Students Plan section of the DMP tool. They'll be able to have a look, give any advice, and let you know if they're happy with your plan. If you need Research Drive storage, they'll be able to request it for you there. And if you need to send your plan to anyone else, you can select Generate PDF in the Action drop-down menu. This will generate a PDF with all of your answers, and you can attach that as required. As mentioned before, if you need to update the answers in your DMP for whatever reason, you can select Edit DMP in the Action drop-down menu, or you can just click the title and it'll open the plan for you to edit. Once you've finished editing, you'll need to make sure you click Save or Save and Next to make sure that you've updated your changes. Now, if your supervisor or principal investigator hasn't gone through the Research Drive requesting process before, we have a useful document on the homepage of the DMP tool. It's linked here, and it shows from page 2 all the steps that they'll need to take to request your Research Drive. The document also contains some frequently asked questions and a flowchart of the data management plan process so that you can understand what happens once you've completed the data management plan. Also linked on this same page is the Library Research Data Management Guide. This is a page that gives most of the information and resources you'll need, and it has some fake example data management plans for each of the faculties that you'll be able to have a look at and have an idea of the things that you should be considering. If you have any questions about what you should put in your plan, we'd definitely suggest having a look here first. So hopefully you now know what you'll need to do to complete a data management plan. As mentioned, if you have any questions, we'd suggest having a look at the library guide in the first instance. It's got a lot of very useful information that will usually cover what you need to know. If your issue isn't covered there, please feel free to send us an email at researchdata@curtin.edu.au, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for your time, and good luck in your research.